Lights Out did it better. Okay, you guys, so I just recently got home from an advanced screening of The Boogeyman. I initially was not super interested in this film. When I saw the trailer, I just felt like it seemed to be your typical generic sort of horror story, something we've seen before. And then I found out it was based on a short story by Stephen King, and I remembered the fact that Silver Bullet was based on a short story by Stephen King, and I actually really like Silver Bullet. And so I decided to give this a go, and when a theater in my area advertised that they were holding an advanced screening earlier than the typical, Thursday preview, I decided I would go ahead and watch it. As of this filming, it is Tuesday, the 30th of May, so a couple days early. The reason I decided not to do a double feature on Thursday is because I'm going to be seeing Into the Spider-Verse. Wait. The second, whichever one, the new Spider-Man thing coming out, whatever, that one. And I'm going to see it pretty early in the afternoon. And I decided I just didn't want to do 2 movies that day because I have work I need to get back to. So I decided I would watch this. And about halfway through this film, what I said at the very beginning of this video came to me. Lights Out did it better. Now, the premise of these 2 movies, it's a bit different, but by referring to Lights Out, what I mean is the entity in here, the boogeyman, doesn't seem to be able to exist when light is present, or can't really harm someone when light is present. And so a similar type of scenario was going on with Lights Out. I really enjoyed that movie. I thought that was an extremely well done horror film based on a short film. So this film starts off solidly enough. I was struck by the human element that they put into this, and by that I mean themes of loss, dealing with grief, family coping, trying to pick up the pieces after the mother has died. And they're all dealing with this loss in their own way. And the 2 sisters, I really like the relationship between the older sister and the little sister. The older sister's kind of old enough to be a mother type figure. And so she plays that part pretty well. And the little girl, I was really impressed with her acting. She did a really good job of playing a child who is terrified and also emotional. There were several sad moments in here where they were interacting with each other and with regard to the loss that they all felt. And the father is a therapist and his profession is to help other people, but yet he cannot help himself in his own grief. He doesn't know how to interact with his children about it. He just kind of is trying to forget, just not even talk about the fact that their mother's gone, or not talk about her too much at all. So I thought that was an interesting sort of little twist they put on that whole dynamic there. And the cinematography was pretty decent. There's that one scene that maybe you've seen in the trailer where the camera flips around and shows the little girl looking at her bed from an upside down angle. I thought that was really well done. There were other little moments like that I thought were pretty good. There were also effective, creepy techniques, like barely being able to see something behind a person, but yet it's there. You don't see it completely, because a lot of times in horror, the more you show of the bad thing, the creature, or the whatever's happening, the less scary it becomes. And so when you keep it in shadows as much as possible, it's this looming threat, but yet you can't see it clearly, that can make it even more terrifying than if you did see it. So, playing these psychological games with you. So I liked those sorts of ways that they were showing scary things happening. And so in general, it wasn't all bad. It started off pretty well. The beginning had me really going with it. It felt decently solid. And then about halfway through or more, it turned cliche, like horror trope stuff. And it was really frustrating. And when that became pretty evident, I started to lose connection with the characters, and I started to lose my fear. And I started, or not that I was super afraid anyway, but what I mean is lose my fear for them. In other words, this movie didn't really scare me, despite the fact that, yeah, there were some pretty creepily filmed moments. What I mean is this wasn't something that was super scary to me. And by the time these horror tropey things were happening, I started to feel disconnected from the characters, from the danger, from the story. There also was no solid enough explanation to me as to what exactly this entity was, how the rules work for it. I didn't understand why the creature would attack certain people in certain situations and then not in others, or why they would attack but then not do serious bodily harm or death, but then at other times they would try to. Okay, all right, so I guess at this point in time, this character doesn't need to be killed, so we can't have this creature kill this character at this moment, or we can't have this creature do serious damage to this character at this moment because it's only halfway through. The danger's not amped up enough. We need to hold that for later. But why? I didn't understand why it went after this particular person one time and then other times it would go after this. It just wasn't, it didn't feel consistent to me. And I don't know exactly what I was missing. I feel almost like maybe there were parts of this film that were edited out. And especially midway through and towards the end, some things just felt like the narrative felt choppy a bit and the editing felt choppy. So that was kind of frustrating. Also, like I mentioned, the typical horror tropes, hospitals that have dark hallways, when hospitals don't have dark hallways, y'all. That only exists in horror movies. Even though things weren't necessarily happening at the hospital, it was just still something that jumped out at me. Why? Also, why are you walking around in the midst of this scary stuff, exploring things in the freaking dark without turning on the flashlight in your phone or trying to turn on the lights? Now, there is at least one particular moment where it shows the attempt to turn on the lights and the light doesn't work. Okay, well, pull out your dang phone. Find some source of light. Why are you walking into this dark room? You can't see a freaking thing. You already know there's maybe something in there. Why are you doing this? It makes no sense to me. Also, there's a character that it shows and they have sort of kind of figured out what's going on with this entity thing, and yet the way their place is set up doesn't make any sense. Like, I can't figure out if electricity is really supposed to be in this place or not, because lights aren't utilized, and yet every once in a while there will be electricity that is used in some form with like a, construction site sort of light. And then when this particular character says they figured out how to deal with this entity, but then they don't really adequately explain how, and the way in which they deal with this entity, or they propose to deal with this entity, doesn't make sense, because if this is a supernatural thing, how the heck do you think you can really harm it with physical weaponry? If it can manifest itself in different places, how do you think you're really going to be able to destroy this thing? If it can appear and disappear, and if it can attach itself to different people, how do you think you can kill it? So stuff like that didn't make sense to me, and it was frustrating. And then, of course, you have the typical thing at the end that happens, as you know, what is often a thing in horror movies. So unfortunately, this felt a lot like the experience I had with Barbarian, even though Barbarian was a better movie for a longer period of time. Also, Smile, that movie, that gave me a clear understanding, and the narrative in that made sense, even though the ending was abominable to me because it wasn't well written and it was just far too predictable. Those two movies I felt had a longer runtime of solid storytelling than this one did. But it reminded me of the experience with those movies, where this is something that had promise. It had me for a good long portion, and then there's just this shift, and it just starts to kind of descend into your typical sort of oh ho hum type of thing. Something else that bothered me with regard to the writing was there's a scene earlier on in the movie where the older daughter is going back to school after the death of her mother, and she's walking through the hallway, and some people are extending their sympathies to her. She just kind of walks right on past them and doesn't even acknowledge how they're reacting to her. And then her friend comes up and starts talking to her, and the girl says, "Thank you for talking to me." Also basically goes on to insinuate that everybody else is just not even talking to her. And I was thinking to myself, we just saw this scene of you walking through the hall and some people reaching out to you and you just brushing them off. So that really stood out at me as an issue, an inconsistency in the writing. That's pretty minor compared to some of the other stuff, but it's just something I noticed right away. Okay, back to the video. It's unfortunate because this film had promise and the acting talent in here was good. I think everybody did a really good job. I did like the handling of the trauma that this family has faced and the grief that they're going through because of the loss of the mother, and the dynamic between the father and his own struggles in dealing with the loss. I think that in itself is probably the stronger element of this film. This guy here was terribly underutilized. He should have been in here so much more. When I saw he was in the cast, I was happy because I thought, oh, okay, this guy. And it was disappointing. So yeah, there's that. I feel like my thoughts are kind of jumbled. Even though I am going by notes, I'm still sort of trying to process how I feel about it. And I'm feeling fundamentally disappointed. I don't hate it totally, but I don't love it either. I'm kind of surprised that this has the critical rating that it does. It's higher than I would have expected from official critics. So I don't know what that's about. Yeah, this film just didn't work for me the way that I was thinking it would, hoping it would. I don't necessarily regret watching it, but I do regret that I took the time and money to go see it on the big screen, and that's not something that I usually say. Also, it doesn't help that I had dental work done today, so I'm not in the best mood and I'm dealing with some pain. That might be also why I'm having trouble getting my thoughts together, but no, this is a thing that happens with me, so maybe it's just me. Anyway, it's obvious to me that this film is going up against really stiff competition with Spider-Man coming out this weekend. I think that movie's probably going to leave most all the other films in the dust because there's pretty high expectation or high anticipation for it. So I'm having a feeling that I'm going to end up liking that one quite a bit more than this, even though, yeah, they're two completely separate genres, but still, I think the experience is going to be more fulfilling than it was with this. Anyway, I don't have anything else. I'm just going to go ahead and stop talking now. It's time. I'm done. All right, you guys. Bye.